Malaysia 370. Contact Ho Chi Minh City 121.9. Good night. These were the last official words transmitted from the cockpit of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 before it vanished into one of aviation's most enduring mysteries. At 12:19 a.m. on March 8, 2014, First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid's voice carried across the radio waves from 35,000 feet above the South China Sea, unaware that within minutes, his Boeing 787 would disappear from radar screens forever, taking with it 239 souls and leaving behind questions that would torment investigators, families, and the world for years to come. The routine red-eye flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing had just crossed into Vietnamese airspace when something went catastrophically wrong in the cockpit, beginning a sequence of events so bizarre and unprecedented that even a decade later, aviation experts struggle to comprehend what truly happened during those final 7 minutes before Flight 370 became a ghost plane wandering the dark expanse of the Indian Ocean. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah was no ordinary pilot. At 53 years old, he had accumulated over 18,400 flight hours and was considered one of Malaysia Airlines' most experienced captains. Colleagues described him as meticulous, professional, and passionate about aviation. His home flight simulator, while unusual, reflected his deep love for flying and his commitment to staying sharp on various aircraft systems. That night, he commanded one of the world's most advanced commercial aircraft, a Boeing 777-200ER with registration 9M-MRO, delivered to Malaysia Airlines in 2002. The aircraft had an impeccable safety record, having flown over 53,000 hours without any significant incidents. Beside him sat 27-year-old First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, a promising young pilot with 2,763 flight hours, who was transitioning to the 777 after years of flying smaller aircraft. The crew had completed all their pre-flight preparations methodically, reviewing weather conditions, flight plans, and aircraft systems. Everything appeared normal as they prepared for what should have been a routine 6-hour journey to China's capital. The 227 passengers settling into their seats that night represented a cross-section of humanity heading to Beijing for business, family reunions, and new adventures. Among them were 153 Chinese nationals, including a group of 19 artists returning from a cultural exhibition in Malaysia. There were families with young children, elderly couples, solo travelers, and business executives. 2 passengers had boarded using stolen Austrian and Italian passports, later identified as Iranian asylum seekers seeking a better life in Germany, their desperate act initially sparking terrorism fears before investigators determined they posed no threat to the flight. The cargo hold contained a shipment of fresh mangosteens and lithium batteries, loads that would later be scrutinized as potential factors in the aircraft's disappearance. None of the souls aboard had any indication that their routine flight would become aviation history's most perplexing mystery, their fates intertwined with a series of deliberate actions that would unfold in the cockpit above the sleeping passengers. Flight 370 departed Kuala Lumpur International Airport at 12:42 a.m., 17 minutes behind schedule due to a minor delay in loading cargo. The takeoff was smooth, and the aircraft climbed steadily through the tropical night sky over peninsular Malaysia. Captain Shah's voice was calm and professional during initial radio communications with Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control, acknowledging routing instructions and altitude assignments with the practiced ease of a veteran pilot. The Boeing 777 performed flawlessly, its twin Rolls-Royce engines providing steady thrust as it climbed to its assigned cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. Weather conditions were favorable, with clear skies and minimal turbulence. The aircraft's systems operated normally, with all instruments showing green across the board. First Officer Farik handled radio communications with his usual competence, his English clear and professional as they transitioned through different air traffic control sectors. As they approached the boundary between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace, everything proceeded according to standard operating procedures. The aircraft was exactly where it should be, flying the prescribed route at the correct altitude and speed. At 1:07 a.m., the Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, known as ACARS, transmitted its final automated message from Flight 370. This system, designed to send routine operational data to the airline, had been functioning normally throughout the flight, providing updates on engine performance, fuel consumption, and aircraft position. The transmission indicated all systems were operating within normal parameters, giving no hint of any impending problems. Investigators would later determine that ACARS was manually disabled sometime between 1:07 and 1:37 a.m., requiring deliberate action from someone with intimate knowledge of the aircraft's systems. The disabling of this system was not random or accidental, but represented a calculated move to prevent the aircraft from automatically reporting its position and status to ground stations. This technical knowledge suggested the involvement of someone with advanced training in Boeing 777 systems, someone who understood exactly which switches to flip and which circuit breakers to pull to render the communication system inoperative while keeping the aircraft flying normally. At 1:19 a.m., as Flight 370 crossed from Malaysian to Vietnamese airspace, First Officer Farik transmitted his final radio call to Kuala Lumpur Control. Malaysia 370, contact Ho Chi Minh City 121.9. Good night. The sign-off was routine, following standard phraseology for airspace transfers, but investigators would later note subtle anomalies in the transmission. Protocol dictated that the first officer should have used the full call sign and provided his current altitude, yet the abbreviated sign-off suggested either casual communication or deliberate brevity. More significantly, Farik never established contact with Ho Chi Minh City Air Traffic Control as instructed. Within minutes of this transmission, Flight 370's secondary radar transponder stopped broadcasting, effectively making the aircraft invisible to civilian air traffic control systems. The transponder, which provides aircraft identification, altitude, and speed information to ground controllers, requires manual intervention to disable. Like the ACARS system, turning off the transponder demanded specific knowledge of cockpit procedures and represented another deliberate action to hide the aircraft's position from tracking systems. Malaysian military radar, designed to detect potential threats rather than manage air traffic, continued tracking an unidentified aircraft that investigators later concluded was Flight 370. The radar data revealed a shocking truth about the aircraft's final minutes under normal operations. After disappearing from civilian radar screens, the Boeing 777 executed a sharp left turn, deviating dramatically from its planned route to Beijing. Instead of continuing northeast toward Vietnam and China, the aircraft turned southwest, crossing back over peninsular Malaysia at a much lower altitude. This maneuver was not gradual or indicative of mechanical problems, but represented a deliberate navigational change requiring pilot input. The radar tracks showed the aircraft flying over Penang, Captain Shah's hometown, before continuing northwest toward the Andaman Sea. The timing and precision of these turns indicated that whoever was controlling Flight 370 possessed extensive knowledge of regional geography and aviation procedures, understanding exactly which radar systems would track the aircraft and which areas offered the best concealment from detection. The mystery of what occurred in the cockpit during those crucial 7 minutes between 1:19 and 1:26 a.m. has spawned countless theories and investigations. Malaysian authorities, Boeing investigators, international aviation experts, and independent researchers have analyzed every piece of available data, yet the truth remains elusive. The deliberate disabling of communication systems, combined with the aircraft's radical course change, points to intentional human action rather than mechanical failure or hijacking by passengers. The level of aviation knowledge required to disable ACARS and the transponder while maintaining flight control suggests involvement by someone with professional pilot training. Either Captain Shah or First Officer Farik, or both working together, had to have initiated these actions, yet their motives remain incomprehensible. Personal investigations into both pilots revealed no definitive evidence of mental health issues, financial problems, or ideological motivations that would explain such drastic actions. Captain Shah's flight simulator data showed he had practiced unusual flight paths, including a route over the southern Indian Ocean similar to Flight 370's suspected final trajectory, but investigators could not conclusively link these simulations to premeditated planning. The Boeing 777 continued flying for over 6 hours after disappearing from radar, its Rolls-Royce engines automatically transmitting hourly signals to satellites as part of routine maintenance monitoring. These satellite pings, initially overlooked in the search efforts, provided crucial evidence that Flight 370 had flown south into the remote Indian Ocean. Analysis of these signals indicated the aircraft had maintained level flight for hours, suggesting someone remained in control long after the initial course deviation. The steady fuel consumption patterns implied the autopilot was engaged, with the aircraft flying predetermined waypoints programmed into its flight management system. This level of continued operation contradicted theories of a sudden catastrophic event and supported the conclusion that deliberate human intervention had occurred. The satellite data painted a picture of an aircraft flying steadily through the night, its passengers likely unconscious from oxygen deprivation if the cabin had been depressurized, while someone in the cockpit guided the Boeing 777 toward its final resting place in one of the world's most remote ocean regions. As dawn broke over the search areas, the absence of Flight 370's expected arrival in Beijing triggered the largest and most expensive search operation in aviation history. Families gathered at airports in Kuala Lumpur and Beijing, their faces etched with growing concern as hours passed without word from the missing aircraft. The initial search focused on the South China Sea along the aircraft's planned route, with ships and aircraft from multiple nations scouring the waters for any sign of wreckage. For days, false leads and debris sightings raised hopes before proving unrelated to the missing flight. The revelation that Flight 370 had flown for hours beyond its last radar contact shifted the search to the Indian Ocean, an area so vast and remote that finding wreckage seemed nearly impossible. Satellite analysis eventually narrowed the search to a corridor thousands of miles long in the southern Indian Ocean, but the precision required to locate wreckage in such deep waters challenged even the most advanced technology. The human cost of Flight 370's disappearance extended far beyond the 239 lives lost that night. Families endured years of uncertainty, hope, and grief as search efforts consumed hundreds of millions of dollars and thousands of personnel hours. The lack of definitive answers tortured those left behind, preventing the closure that comes with understanding how and why their loved ones died. Chinese families, comprising the majority of passengers, staged protests and demanded accountability from Malaysian authorities and the airline. The crew members' families faced additional scrutiny as investigations focused on possible pilot involvement, their grief compounded by suspicions about their loved ones' final actions. First Officer Farouk's family maintained his innocence, describing a dedicated young pilot with everything to live for, while Captain Shah's family defended his character and professionalism, despite mounting speculation about his possible role in the aircraft's disappearance. The psychological trauma extended to air traffic controllers, airline personnel, and investigators who struggled with the knowledge that their systems and procedures had somehow failed to prevent or explain this tragedy. International aviation authorities responded to Flight 370's disappearance with sweeping changes designed to prevent future mysteries. The International Civil Aviation Organization mandated improved aircraft tracking systems, requiring airlines to report aircraft positions at least every 15 minutes over remote areas. New regulations demanded that commercial aircraft carry emergency locator transmitters capable of floating and transmitting signals for extended periods after water impacts. Cockpit security procedures were reviewed and enhanced, with some airlines implementing systems requiring 2 authorized personnel in the cockpit at all times. Aircraft communication systems were redesigned to make it more difficult to disable multiple systems simultaneously, though critics argued that determined pilots could still circumvent safeguards if motivated to do so. The aviation industry invested billions in satellite tracking technology and real-time flight monitoring systems, driven by the recognition that in an era of global connectivity, losing an aircraft completely was unacceptable to the flying public and the families who entrust their lives to commercial aviation. Years of searching eventually yielded scattered pieces of wreckage that confirmed Flight 370's fate in the Indian Ocean. Wing flaps, landing gear doors, and interior panels washed ashore on beaches across the western Indian Ocean, carried by currents from the suspected crash site. Analysis of the wreckage provided insights into the aircraft's final moments, with damage patterns suggesting a high-speed impact with the ocean surface. However, the main wreckage and the crucial flight data recorders remained lost in the deep ocean, their secrets buried beneath miles of water. The official search was suspended in 2017 after covering over 46,000 square miles of ocean floor, making it clear that without more precise location data, finding the primary wreckage would remain elusive. Private search efforts continued, funded by families and independent organizations, but the vastness of the search area and the depth of the ocean presented seemingly insurmountable challenges. The legacy of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 extends beyond the technological improvements and regulatory changes it prompted. The disappearance highlighted the psychological vulnerabilities within commercial aviation. The possibility that trusted professionals might exploit their positions and knowledge for destructive purposes. It challenged assumptions about aircraft security and monitoring systems, revealing gaps that had existed unnoticed for decades. The case study became essential training material for investigators, pilots, and security personnel, illustrating how deliberate human action could circumvent multiple safety systems simultaneously. Aviation psychologists developed new screening procedures and support systems designed to identify and assist pilots experiencing mental health challenges before they could pose risks to flight safety. The incident sparked global conversations about privacy versus safety in aircraft monitoring, balancing pilot autonomy with the need for real-time tracking and intervention capabilities. For the families of the 239 souls aboard Flight 370, the search for answers continues despite the official investigation's conclusion that the aircraft was deliberately diverted by someone in the cockpit. Their pain reminds us that behind every aviation mystery lie real people with names, dreams, and loved ones waiting for their return. The passengers who boarded that flight with hopes for their futures in Beijing never arrived at their destinations, their lives cut short by actions they could neither foresee nor prevent. The crew members who dedicated their careers to safe flight operations became central figures in a tragedy that challenged everything the aviation community believed about professional integrity and system security. If you've been following this story or others like it, please take a moment to share your thoughts about aviation safety and the lessons we must learn from tragedies like Flight 370. Your engagement helps ensure these stories serve their purpose of preventing future disasters and honoring those who were lost. Subscribe to stay informed about ongoing developments in aviation safety and the continuous efforts to solve remaining mysteries in commercial flight operations. Together we can work toward a future where no aircraft simply vanishes from our skies, where every flight ends safely, and where families never again endure the agony of not knowing what happened to their loved ones in their final moments above the vast expanse of our oceans.